Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session today entitled Securing SAP Transformation on Azure. To interact in this session, you may type any message or question in the chat window in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. Your questions will be addressed in the Q&A portion of the session today. If we're unable to address your questions during the session, we will respond post-event. For closed captioning, please click the CC button in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. The session is being recorded, and the recording will be available post-event. At the end of the session, we will be sharing a link to a brief survey. Please complete the survey prior to leaving the session today. If you're unable to complete the survey before you leave, you will also be receiving an email with the survey information. And now I would like to introduce you to Sloan Mankus. Sloan is the Microsoft Alliance Leader at PwC for Cyber and Risk. Sloan, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Carrie, and welcome everyone. We are thrilled to have assembled such a fantastic group of presenters from both Microsoft and PwC to talk about securing SAP transformation on Azure. These are great insights that we are super excited to share with you. I know you're going to have questions, so feel free, as Carrie pointed out, I will be monitoring those in the Q&A, and then I will be moderating questions at the end. If there are things that we can answer along the way, I'll be happy to throw those in the Q&A chat bubbles. And if not, then we'll be moderating those with our speakers today at the end. So feel free to throw those questions out there as we're speaking. With that, I would like to turn it over to Benil and allow him to start our presenters and their own introductions. So over to you, and happy to have you, team.
Thank you, Sloan. My name is Binal Pillai, and I am responsible for partner strategy and business development for security, compliance, and identity at Microsoft HQ. I lead a security SAP on Azure initiative worldwide, and I'm really excited to be part of this conversation with Nitin and Paul.
Thank you, Binil. Hi, everyone. My name is Nitin Lalit. I'm a director here in PwC's cyber practice. I bring along 18 years of experience working on cybersecurity strategy, design, and implementation. My focus areas have been identity and access management and cloud security consulting. Additionally, I've been leading this initiative of securing SAP on Azure, working closely with Microsoft, and a key contributor towards the firm's thought leadership. Based on my years of experience with cybersecurity, I look forward to providing you key insights today to our audience. Passing over to Paul now.
Yep. Hi, folks. Paul Reynolds. I'm a senior manager based out of New York. My main focuses are in financial services and governance, risk and compliance. And I've worked for PwC as well as the US and the UK. And I've also spent some time in industry at one of the major UK banks. So I kind of focus on the Microsoft Alliance piece here. And I've also been working as part of PwC's broader cyber strategy to help deliver excellence to our clients. So looking forward to chatting with you guys today.
Thank you, Paul. Let's go to the next slide and we can walk through the agenda for today. So you can see the key 4 topics today for our webinar. The first one here is why do we need to secure SAP? So this is where we'll talk about what makes SAP unique and why do we need to pay extra attention towards securing SAP. The second topic will focus on the changing landscape and the clients moving towards the cloud, the different deployment models, and how to really ensure that all the key security areas are covered for the clients. Thirdly, we'll have our Microsoft team focus on the native Azure security controls and the breadth of Microsoft cyber tools to enforce the right security. Then we'll talk about what are the next steps of starting the journey of securing SAP transformation and how you can work closely with PwC and Microsoft. And towards the end, we'll have time for question and answers. All right, move on to the next slide, please. All right, let's talk about why do we need to secure SAP. When we look at the news, we see new cyber attacks almost every day. The question is, does this also affect SAP applications? So SAP systems and database handles extremely sensitive information and is a prime target for attackers. Just to give you a context, 77% of the world's transactions are touched by an SAP system. That's why protecting the SAP system is a key priority. Cyber attacks on SAP systems may be to cause a denial of service or towards theft of critical sensitive data. The cyber breach can obviously lead to big material impact in millions of dollars for organizations. There are known vulnerabilities in the SAP systems that attackers can exploit. And once the attacker is inside, there are very few controls to detect the attacker's footprint. At the same time, with the SAP system, it needs more correlated information to get a clear picture of the attack. Also, due to the breadth of the SAP systems, the SOC teams traditionally have limited visibility, and that's why SAP security needs better planning, design, and implementation. Let's move on to the next topic, and we'll talk about the changing landscape and really how we can secure SAP systems with better planning. So with the changing landscape, as you evaluate public clouds for migrating your SAP implementation or look to enable your SAP system based on software as a service, it's really important to understand which responsibility is owned by the customer and which one is owned by the cloud provider from Microsoft. There are general 4 deployment models when you're looking to deploy any enterprise IT systems, including SAP. Most of the audience must already be aware of these models, but let me just provide a brief intro on the models. Going from right to left, the first one is our traditional on-premise model, wherein all the responsibilities are owned by the customer, including the compute resources, applications, as well as the data. The second one is the infrastructure as a service, wherein the computing resources are owned by the cloud service provider, complemented by the storage and networking capabilities based on the demand. The middleware, applications, software, and data is still owned by the organizations. The third one here is the platform as a service, wherein along with computing infrastructure, the middleware, OS, and database is also provided by the cloud service provider. Lastly, we have the software as a service, wherein the applications are provided by the cloud service provider and data or identities or accounts are owned by the organizations. Key point to note here is that all of these models, the responsibility varies between the cloud service provider, that is Microsoft Azure in this case, versus the organization. In all the models, data is owned by the customer, so data security continues to be the biggest concern. Based on the size, complexity, cost, and other key factors, you may choose the deployment model. And this really helps us set the context of which all areas the customer organizations are responsible for cybersecurity based on different deployment models. Paul, if you can go to the next slide, please. We can contextualize these deployment models more specific to SAP now. Now, when we look at the SAP, there are 3 different deployment options that are available. And this view that you see really provides a layered security and also gives you a glimpse of the Microsoft technologies that are provided across the 3 different deployment types. So again, if we go from right to left in this view, the first option is the SAP RISE, wherein the SAP system is offered as a software as a service, wherein you can access the SAP system from your environment. And as we discussed on the previous slide, the key infrastructure, the OS, database, everything is owned by Microsoft Azure in this case, or the hosting provider. But you still need to ensure the security for your data, identities, privacy, devices, compliance, and risk management. And this is where you can selectively enable Microsoft's key cyber technologies, which you may be owning as part of your existing licensing, such as Azure AD for identity and access management, Microsoft Sentinel for threat monitoring, as well as Microsoft Information Protection for data classification and labeling of information. Now let's move on to the second option, where you already may have your SAP deployment on premise or planning to deploy on another non-Azure cloud provider. In this deployment option, you may continue to leverage other non-Microsoft third-party technologies that you may already have enabled, and you still have the option to integrate your existing Microsoft Cyber technologies to protect your data through Azure AD, Sentinel, or SAP Threat Protection. Now let's talk about the last option, which is the most important option and most popular option chosen by 95% of the customers, which is SAP on Azure from an infrastructure as a service deployment model. In this model, you have the flexibility to enable Microsoft Cyber technologies across all the layers, including infrastructure, network, devices, and data. This includes technologies like Azure Firewall, Microsoft Defender, Azure Gateway, and going up towards Azure AD, Sentinel, and information protection. So this really gives you a good idea of what are the different options that you have when you are looking to deploy SAP. Now, let's move on to the next slide and go a little bit deeper dive into the SAP architecture. So this SAP architecture really gives you a glimpse of the different layers. And when you host this SAP architecture on Azure Cloud, it needs to be protected at all layers, including app layer, data layer, OS layer, and network layer. The main application administration and interaction for the users include interfaces such as SAP Business Connector, the SAP GUI interface, as well as the Fiori layer. The key aspects and controls from identity and access management perspective play a key role here. The authentication, which includes multi-factor authentication, authorization, and role-based access control for administration, as well as end users, need to be planned and designed appropriately. Also, the privilege access needs to be managed appropriately and reviewed on a regular basis. Next, if you see the database or the data layer, it consists of extremely sensitive information, and that's why the data security, the data classification, and data compliance plays a very important role in the overall security. Also, a point to note here is there are multiple other non-SAP systems which integrate with the overall architecture. And that's why the breadth of security coverage needs to be ensured for SAP and any non-SAP integrated systems as well. And this is where deploying SAP on Azure Cloud gives you an advantage with Microsoft Cyber toolset that can be quickly enabled and configured based on your needs. Let's move on to the next slide, and we can give you a glimpse of how we typically solve this problem with our unique PwC framework. So based on our years of experience in cybersecurity, we have come up with a unique PwC cyber framework to not only simplify, but also better secure your SAP implementation. This includes all the key security areas that an organization needs to plan for as part of your SAP deployment on the Azure cloud or on premise. We have done a detailed classification of the key controls, requirements, and use cases that are applicable in each of the 8 domains. This includes identity and access management, data protection and lifecycle management, threat and vulnerability management, incident response and fraud management, secure DevOps and cloud security, network and perimeter security, secure logging, monitoring, and threat detection, and lastly, governance, risk, compliance, and privacy. Now, we will go into the details for each of the domains, and I will pass on to my team member Paul here to give you details on some of the key controls and technology overview for each of the domains. So passing over to Paul now. Thank you.
Yep, sure. So look, I mean, this framework really allows us to develop the appropriate SAP and Azure security model for you. So let's dive into some of the detail, first level of detail here. So this view basically just kind of gives the next level down of this SAP and Azure architecture, and just want to run through some of the core controls and key tools that we can deploy in terms of Azure here. So starting with identity and access management. So obviously, a lot of organizations don't do a full cloud transformation from the start. It's more of a journey that clients are on. So Azure kind of offers tool sets to kind of support that hybrid journey, such as AD Connect, which effectively allows you to have a hybrid deployment of Active Directory, linking both your on-prem and cloud AD instances. And as well as that, within the identity space, there's a number of other capabilities within Azure to help automate your identity processes across elements such as access reviews and your privileged access management as well. And then if we move on and have a think about data loss prevention, thinking about the kind of data that SAP stores, processes, transmits, the high confidentiality of that, it really needs protected from a number of different threats, one of them being the insider threat. And Azure's Microsoft Information Protection tool is a perfect solution to help protect from the DLP perspective in terms of defining your DLP policies, tuning that, and helping to address any threats within there. Next, I'm going to club a few together here. So thinking about threat vulnerability management, instant response, logging and monitoring. I'm sure you guys are all aware of the Microsoft Sentinel, which effectively offers the security incident and event monitoring capabilities. A real core control for us here in terms of securing SAP and on Azure. Now, Microsoft have developed a specific connector to monitor for SAP specific threats through Sentinel, which Benil will go into further on in the presentation. But Sentinel hooks into SAP pretty well in terms of support and integration with NetWeaver logging, etc. And then moving on, thinking about from the DevOps and application security perspective, so I mean, it's not just a one-time security model to secure SAP here. The environment's constantly changing, the threat vectors are constantly changing. So within here, we need to pay attention in how we maintain, upgrade, and lock down that SAP environment on a continuous basis within the cloud, so that we can react to certain things like the emerging threats, patch releases, changing regulatory requirements quickly. So within this space, we've got Azure Application Services, which is effectively a platform in itself, but that really supports the agile cybersecurity engineering activity to help you address the items that I just discussed there. And then moving down to the network layer, obviously we want to try and reduce the attack surface of your SAP deployment as much as possible. And there's some SAP customizations and specifics that Azure offers within this space across Azure Firewall, DDoS protection, and their associated security groups, which Benil will get into further down in the presentation. And then finally, if we're thinking about governance, risk, and compliance, how you're managing your regulatory requirements, your policy compliance requirements, and being able to continually improve the security of your SAP deployment. Within this space, we've got Compliance Manager, which effectively advises continuously on the security of the deployment, gives automated and updated maturity improvement suggestions so that we can continually improve the environment. But that's just a few kind of core controls. There's a number of other controls and capabilities within Azure that help kind of build this SAP and Azure security model and lock down the environment. And we'll get into those a bit later within the presentation. Nathan, do you want to add anything else in this section before we switch on?
Yeah, so thanks, Paul, for really highlighting all the key controls within the 8 different domains. So I want to just add that, apart from these controls, we have really put together the detailed use cases which are very specific to SAP, which cover each of these domains. And, we have done a detailed mapping of how we can protect that using the Microsoft technologies. And we've worked closely with our Microsoft team here to come up with the overall solution architecture. So now I'll pass on to Binal, who will walk you through some of the Microsoft specifics and the native Azure controls. So thank you, Paul. Passing over to Binal now.
Thanks, Nitin. Thanks, Paul. So if you can move on to next slide, please. Yeah, so just want to give you a context. At Microsoft, we spent over $1 billion every year on research and development to secure customer organization and enable them to digitally transform. The important thing is without compromising productivity. So we do this through our partners, operations, and technology. And what makes Microsoft so different to other cloud providers and even security providers is that we have intelligence informed by trillions of sources, so we can help customers make smarter decisions and remediate security challenges faster. If you look at this slide, these are the cloud-based security controls for securing SAP on Azure, identity and access management, apps and data security, network security, threat protection, and security management. So there are many more. It's kind of prioritizing which one is the top security control that every SAP customer should consider. And then this becomes an early thoughts even prior to discuss and come to the conclusion for the migration blueprint and architecture. So that's where we are leaning to. If you can move on to the next slide, please. So the idea is how do we simplify the security management with the Azure service, right, as an end customer? As Paul mentioned and worked through the PwC's 8 cybersecurity domains, keeping them on SAP on Azure transformation roadmap, I wanted to touch base some of the key native Azure security controls by highlighting their role in the broader cloud security architecture context, and that becomes a standard, a norm for any SAP migration and modernization opportunity and project. So first, I want to say these controls are based on the Zero Trust framework to deploy the capabilities to protect your SAP system. And this framework helps you to manage complexity of your organization. It also provides end-to-end security for your SAP. So let's take a few examples. I know Paul and Nitin has covered some of them in detail. I just wanted to highlight maybe 3 or 4 of the specific controls here. The first one is identity and access management, which covers controls to establish a secured identity and access controls using Azure Active Directory, including the use of single sign-on, strong authentication, manage identities that include service principals for applications, conditional access, and account anomalies monitoring, right? That's the one big area for identity and access management perspective. The second important security control is, of course, network security, which covers controls to secure and protect Azure networks, including securing virtual networks, establishing private connection, preventing and mitigating external attacks, and securing DNS. And brute force attacks that saturate SAP network links and resources. And if you look at the DDoS protection in network security, you can augment your SAP investment with robust SLA guaranteed Azure DDoS protection for brute force attacks. That's a very important and prominent one from a security control standpoint. The other one is Defender for Cloud. It's a tool for security posture management and threat protection. It strengthens the security posture of your SAP cloud resources. And with its integrated Microsoft Defender plans, Defender for Cloud protects SAP workloads running in Azure, hybrid, and other cloud platform. And last not least, SAP customers require a multi-layered monitoring solution for SAP threat monitoring, covering both the infrastructure layer and the business and application layer. We'll go a little bit deeper on that particular solution that we call threat monitoring for SAP from a Microsoft Sentinel product in a couple of PowerPoints. Please move on to the next slide. So I wanted to start going a little bit deeper on the Sentinel. We have a security threat monitoring product capability designed for SAP. I just mentioned earlier. It's a Microsoft Sentinel connector for SAP for threat monitoring. So before I go deep into Sentinel threat monitoring for SAP, I wanted to provide a quick overview about Microsoft Sentinel, our cloud-native SIM solution powered by AI and automation to optimize security operations. And Sentinel's cloud-native, kind of solution empowers you with the scale, flexibility, and speed of the cloud itself, while eliminating the time and money spent on managing infrastructure. It detects complex evolving threats across massive volume of low fidelity signals using built-in machine learning developed by Microsoft security expert. It gives you everything you need to expedite incident response, streamlining investigations with the robust incidents, and equipping you with built-in automation. And finally, with these efficiency gains, Microsoft Sentinel gives you the ability to finally to protect about from a finding and stopping threat standpoint. It includes robust threat hunting tools to help you get ahead of attackers. So that's a kind of a just to give you overall context of what Sentinel is about. So Paul, if you can go to the next slide, please. So just want to give a little bit of reality from the current market scenario standpoint. As we know, SAP is increasingly a well-known target from attackers, and attacks come from both outside and inside. And SAP exploits are increasing day-to-day basis. For example, your finance and supply chain need to be protected from security breaches, malicious activities, and misconfiguration need to be detected immediately. For effective threat detection, SAP events need to be correlated across the enterprise together with the other security events. And more importantly, SAP needs to be better integrated with the enterprise security management system. So from a business context, Security Operations Center, SOC, are having a hard time to applying their corporate security standards to SAP systems as they are a black box and isolated from other systems. So the problem statement is kind of how can a customer better detect and monitor security threats in SAP system that have been overlooked so far. Say, for example, usage of privileged privileged users with powerful roles and profiles, suspicious user activities, or even execution of sensitive programs and transactions, right? And what's happening today is SAP operations team relies on SAP's built-in feature to be able to reactively query alerts when needed. And SAP has its security monitoring product, which we call enterprise threat detection. However, its adoption is low and unable to cover non-SAP layers. And some customers may manually ingest SAP logs to classic SIM, which is not real time and involves a risk of log manipulation. So with Microsoft Sentinel, both SAP team and SOC can use a common SIM solution to proactively identify security anomalies for the entire IT landscape and take corrective actions in a timely manner. And with its native integration with SAP, threat monitoring or threat detection becomes more robust, and creation of compliance reports dashboard can be automated. So that's kind of the relevance why Microsoft Sentinel for SAP threat monitoring is an important capability for every customer. Move on to next slide, please. So I just wanted to go a little bit deeper into as a product, which is Microsoft Sentinel for threat monitoring. Let's see what approach would be effective for SAP threat monitoring. There are several key requirements for an effective threat monitoring solution for SAP. The first one is a multi-layered coverage. An SAP threat monitoring solution needs to cover both the infrastructure layer, which is virtual machine, storage, and network, as well as the business and applicative layers, since the threats traverse every layer of the SAP system. That's the first one. Number two is a rich insight into SAP applicative and transactional data. So SAP systems produce viable security data in the form of change documents, audit logging, job execution, data transformation, and more. For a complete picture of potential threats, you need visibility into all this activity. That's really fundamental. And the third one is a correlation across enterprise data sources. And SAP systems, as we know, are complex, and the indicators of compromise are often not straightforward. So to reduce the noise, it's imperative to cross-relate across additional data, sources such as network, storage, identity, as well as across other entities such as systems and users. And that is, I would say, that the top three priorities requirements for the customer consideration. And then flexibility of deployment, we know that factor, as well as threat detection specific to SAP. And the last one is customizability. So, I just want to give you the overall picture and how do we prioritize and what are the key requirements for adopting this threat monitoring solution for an SAP system. Move on to next slide, please. So the Azure Sentinel SAP threat monitoring solution can be deployed in one simple package that includes a few components. The first one is a rich NetWeaver data connector. The SAP collector, so its connector is delivered as a Docker container image that can be deployed anywhere in the network and integrated into NetWeaver cable system. The data connector collects over different log files with SAP NetWeaver enabled system that allows monitoring business and application layer risk within the SAP system. The interesting thing is the logs that comes from SAP are not in a good format to ingest. Hence, we put them into the Docker container. And this Docker container can be on Kubernetes, VM, cloud, or on-prem, doesn't matter. We don't mind as long as the format that Sentinel can use. What is cool is we can take it from any SAP system or even other cloud platform. It does not need to be on Azure always. For the container, we keep data security using Azure Key Vault. The other element is SAP underlying infrastructure for data connector. For example, existing Azure Sentinel data connector, such as those for virtual machines, networking, and Azure Active Directory, and to monitor underlying infrastructure. And the last one is built-in security content, because out-of-the-box detections catch important SAP threats like system configuration changes, execution of sensitive function modules, and suspicious activity by privileged users. Plus, a workbook helps secure operation team to visualize the security health of their system, right? So all in, these are the kind of a solution architecture standpoint. We are providing a end-to-end product coverage for threat monitoring. So you can see the logs at the left right corner of the slide, where you can pull the information from for threat monitoring perspective. And these log files are keep increasing on our day-to-day basis. So eventually you will be able to get all the source information from different log files representing both infrastructure and application layers. So that's pretty much. I have one more slide, I think. Move on to the next slide, please. Cool. This is just to give how the SAP and Azure migration motion takes place. There are a few things. One, why it is an important and why Microsoft is an important for SAP migration point of view. SAP customers broadly favor Microsoft Azure because one, it is a cloud platform optimized for SAP. Second, it offers unmatched security, compliance, and business continuity. It's the industry's largest compliant portfolio for your SAP workload in the cloud and on-prem. And it is a platform for innovation, tap into more than 100 plus Azure services, apply intelligent analytics, and integrate with M365, Teams, Power Apps, and Power BI to discover insight that drive a new customer experience. And last but not least, it is a partnership that you can trust. After decades of working together, both Microsoft and SAP, we have announced a preferred cloud partnership to simplify and accelerate your transformation to the cloud. So that's pretty much I have. With that, let me pass over to Nitin to provide the steps to get started with secure SAP transformation or Azure deployment. Over to you, Nitin. Thanks.
Thank you, Binil, for doing a deep dive onto the Microsoft technologies and native Azure controls. So for the audience here, how do we get started? I know, a lot of you may be on your SAP transformation journey, whether you have an existing on-premise deployment or you're planning to migrate to Azure cloud, or you're looking to augment security on your existing deployment. We are definitely happy to assist you and get started. You've already learned about our unique framework, the different Microsoft technologies. Let's talk about how you can take that step forward on securing SAP now. We can help you in multiple ways, through our unique framework and accelerators by helping assess your current state, wherein we understand the complexity of your architecture, your requirements, and really help outline the gaps from a cybersecurity perspective. Also, we can help design your future state architecture for securing SAP with a detailed roadmap and milestones that will help mature your overall security on your SAP transformation. You can actually engage with both PwC and Microsoft through a joint workshop wherein the experts from Microsoft and PwC team will work very closely with your team to understand and help plan and design the security in a very quick turnaround time. And that can basically serve as a foundation for your next step towards securing your SAP. Paul, do you want to add any more details here, please?
Yeah. I mean, just to add, these three approaches that we take down at the bottom, all of these items are really collaborative approaches, with the end goal in mind of helping you develop the most effective security model specifically for your organization. So through these sessions, we will work with you to understand your environment. We've got a number of scoping questions that we'll run through with you to help understand what the end goal looks like here, and we'll propose a design which we feel works best for you, and help work with you to taper it with your internal SMEs. And ultimately through these efforts, we want to partner with you, which will effectively help you continually secure your SAP security posture. As part of that partnership, you'll be exposed to the latest Azure SAP specific technologies, and we'll help you get those integrated into your security model in its current state. And just lastly, across the 8 domains that we spoke about earlier on today, we've got subject matter experts within each of the areas, for example, identity, that just focus specifically on that. And we will bring those SMEs into these sessions to help get that security model defined and up and running for you guys. But back to you, Nathan.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah, Paul, if you can go to the next slide, I just want to give a glimpse of the overall end-to-end, phased approach. So on the previous slide, we just talked about how to get started and really help you with your current state architecture, future state architecture, and really put together a secure design. If you look at end-to-end, PwC and Microsoft can also help you with the overall implementation, wherein we will help configure these Microsoft technologies, tailor them based on your needs and requirements. And also we can provide you operations once everything is productionalized in the production environment. So we are here to help you from an end-to-end journey from your current state, future state, design, as well as implementation and operations. And feel free to reach out to the PwC and Microsoft contacts here, the speakers here, and we can definitely connect you and help you with the joint workshop. So let's wrap up here. Binal, do you want to add anything before we go into Q&A? You're on mute, Binal, sorry.
Sorry for that. Yeah, absolutely. This is very interesting, and I think as Nitin mentioned, the discovery and engagement, right? The early stage is the most important thing. Where we can have a product discussion, understand your requirements, and identify the right security controls and measures for your SAP migration and modernization opportunity. And then that will help the stage to really set or define the architecture and blueprint for migration. That makes the life much more easier. The key point is to have security in the early discussion. It's an early thought, not the afterthought, so that it becomes a priority for considering and moving your SAP assets more secured way, right? That's the key thing. Thanks, Nitin.
Thank you so much, Binal. Let's move on to the Q&A, and I'll pass on to Sloan to check if we have any questions from the audience here.
Yes, we did have a few come in, so thank you so much, Nitin. I think I'll start with this, and perhaps Nitin or Paul, you would want to answer. Maybe if people were just asking, could you provide more details as to what a joint workshop agenda would look like, and maybe highlight the key inputs as well as outputs that one could expect?
Thank you, Sloan, and thanks, audience, for the great question here. So, our workshop is very uniquely designed, and what we have done here is we typically approach this workshop in 2 sessions. So think about it. The first session is more exploratory, where we sit with your team and understand the key requirements, understand what your current state architecture looks like, and that really gives us a good glimpse of what are the gaps from a future state perspective. So we take all that information back, and we then plan for our next session, which is more targeted towards your future state architecture as well as roadmap. And we come back, sit with you, and walk you through how the future state architecture should look like, augmenting it with the different Microsoft technologies that we just talked about. We are very flexible, and we tailor this based on your availability and needs. And we bring in a questionnaire that really accelerates the time we take to understand your current state and talk about the architecture. And then using our accelerators, we focus on the best practices and really present what a future state should look like, tailored for your organization. So this is how we typically go about, and both Microsoft and PwC experts participate in this workshop, closely working with your experts and your team members. So hope that answers the question here for the audience.
That's fantastic, and I think it's a good segue perhaps to another question that came in, and I'm gonna actually move this over to Benil, if that's okay. I think it's a Microsoft-centric question just around the solution. Could you provide us some details as to what specific threat scenarios the SAP Sentinel connector is actually providing? Thanks, Benil.
Thanks, Sloan. A really good question. Thanks for that. And the answer is there are plenty of use cases that you can apply on the business logic, OS layer, or deep database layer, network layer, and application layer. So maybe let us take an example for modification of user account at DB layer to identify changes for user account in HANA DB. That's one use case. The other one is from a network layer perspective to identify logons from an unexpected network from a watch list standpoint. And the third one from an application layer, the changes to system profile parameters, etc. So there is, for example, at the beginning when we launched this Sentinel threat monitoring for SAP, we came up with around 27 different use cases. And we and Microsoft, we have actually deployed that in our protection. And now we are actually going double on creating more new use cases. I think it's more almost up to 60 use cases at this point of time. So just, kind of we are experimenting that as well to make sure this can be widely used. So this is a great opportunity for any customers to look at, what are the use cases available in threat monitoring, and then you can pick the right one to lay over the SAP to protect from any kind of threat.
Thank you, Benil. And just to pull on that thread a little bit further, there was a follow-up question. If SAP solution sits on a multi-cloud platform, can SAP threat monitoring collect data from the multi-cloud platform? I think you were starting to go there. If you want to provide a little bit more info, thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Lon. So yes, the solution provides a continuous threat detection and analytics for SAP system deployed on Azure or in other clouds or in on-prem. So it is important to know which type of SAP system you want to connect as for HANA or others, because there are differences on each of the log types that we collect. So short answer is yes, it actually can be deployed any cloud-based solutions, SAP systems you have.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that follow-up. And then actually, a quick follow-up. I think it's workshop related. So I'm going to ask Nitin, you or Paul, you may want to answer this one. And it's really around how to continue to leverage current tool or solution investments along with the Azure deployment. In other words, someone was asking, we have an agreement with a third party that's not Microsoft secure, that's a non-Microsoft security tool, and we're operating a tool set as well as the associated processes for this. So can we leverage this alongside our Azure deployment and even integrate? So kind of an open-ended question, but it feels like it's a little bit related to what you were talking about in the workshop question. Let you answer that.
Sure, Sloan. So, Paul, do you want to chime in? And I'll provide more details here.
Yeah, sure. You know, and this is kind of a key element of the workshops that we will complete with you guys. We will effectively do a tools rationalization to understand how your current SAP environment is secured and the toolage associated with that. And we'll do that tools rationalization against the Azure capabilities that are available and work with you to understand how we can integrate both of them. In terms of, for the example, if you do want to continue to use other third-party applications, there are integrations built into the Azure platform to allow connections with these third-party apps. You know, Sentinel has got numerous APIs, same with a number of the identity products, and just throughout really the 8 domains in there. That's just at a high level, but Nathan, do you want to add anything more?
Sure, Paul. Yeah, so I think that's a very interesting question, and we see that all the time when we do our workshops. That is the first question clients ask, like how well, you know, the Microsoft technologies integrate with non-Microsoft technologies. So, you know, with our workshop, what we typically do is we do a rationalization of the tools. We try to understand what are the different tools that you have enabled for different cybersecurity areas, and then we do a planning and design of how that can be integrated with your Microsoft cyber technologies. So also I want to add here that, you know, Microsoft tools are very extensible with APIs available that you can integrate, customize, and really plug in your existing environment. And lastly, I would leave a note there on that one that you may already own the licenses for Microsoft that you may not know. So I think you should definitely double click into that, and we can help you through our workshops to really see what are the cyber technologies that come along with your existing licensing, and that can help save you cost and overall licensing cost going with another third-party technologies. And we can work together with Microsoft and tailor that for you.
That's great. Thank you very much, panel. We had 2 other questions come in, and one I think we have implicitly already answered, but I'm going to throw it out there in case you build it into the answer to the last question. So let me just throw it out there. You don't need to answer it just yet. Someone did ask, how do the Microsoft native solutions such as Sentinel that are competing with Onapsis, Virtual Forge, Power Connect? I think we've had some discussion there and implied that with some of our answers as well as the capability discussions. But if you want to add on to that, feel free. But let me ask the final question that I see that's come in. We've talked a lot about monitoring and threat detection, and thank you, Benil, for that. So this may just be a follow-up in the case that you think there's anything that you haven't answered in regards in your previous answers. So this one asks, of course, Microsoft and SAP have worked together to provide a comprehensive security monitoring using Sentinel comprehensively. Can we use Azure's built data analysis tools to also further automate that monitoring? So I know we've talked about it, but this seems to be a question around automation. And maybe Benil, I'll start with you first if you want to comment there. Thank you so much.
Sure, absolutely. That's a really good question. I think I want to really go back to the fundamental. The fundamental, like I mentioned in one of my slides about the simplification, right? So we want to make sure the Azure services that provides for SAP, and that need to be taken care through the simplification process, not only for threat detection and protection standpoint, as well as from a SOAR standpoint, right? You know, from an operation, SOC operation standpoint. So automation is critical for us. So we wanted to make sure you are accessing MDR or XDR services that can be integrated with your SIM solution, which is Sentinel in this case, so that you get an end-to-end picture from a threat monitoring, analysis, and taking action perspective. So automation is fundamental, and we want to make sure our technology and tool provide within the Azure services, as well as productivity tools, right, to connect together. I'll give an example. Our XDR philosophy allows us to bring together both our M365 platform and solution and Azure together at one place from a cloud and hybrid standpoint, including on premises, right? So automation is fundamental. Simplicity is fundamental from an operation standpoint. Say absolutely. So happy to really take any further follow-up in if you have any specific question in terms of how the architecture look like or any other challenges you experience that we can definitely follow on. But as a principal standpoint or architecture standpoint, definitely with the support of SIM, XDR, and SOAR, we want to make sure that your SOC operation is completely efficient, automated, and provide the best coverage from a security standpoint. Nitin, you may add if I missed something from there.
No, absolutely. I think you termed it very well with all the research and development that we have seen with the Sentinel and the first-hand experience that we have had with Sentinel. It has definitely all the capabilities against the competition products like Onapsys, and it is scalable and really can be customized based on your needs. So that's what I'll leave the customers here and audience with.
Well, that's a great way to leave it. And thank you, panel, for answering the questions that came in. We had some really good, thorough questions and appreciate your in-depth answers. Really appreciate as well the time that you've spent describing securing your SAP transformation on Azure.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Carrie, I'll hand it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Sloan. And thanks everyone for joining us today. And I have put the link to the survey in the chat window. So if you could please take a minute to complete that survey before you leave today. We've allowed a few extra minutes for you to do that. And again, we appreciate you joining us. And this concludes our session for today.